Data and digital should be completely integrated in the entire ecosystem of your campaign. And this is why I built Campaign Nucleus.
I'm Eric Wilson, managing partner of Startup Caucus, an investment fund and incubator for Republican campaign technology. Welcome to the Business of Politics show. On this podcast, we bring you into conversation with the entrepreneurs who build best-in-class political businesses, the funders who provide the capital, and the operatives who put it all together to win campaigns. Brad Parscale is our guest today. He's the founder of Campaign Nucleus, a software platform to help campaigns break down data silos and connect with other apps in the campaign tech ecosystem. Brad was an integral part of the campaign team that helped Donald Trump win the White House in 2016, and he was campaign manager for the re-election for more than 2 years. In our conversation today, we discuss the reason campaigns face data silos and why breaking them down is so important, how he's making the switch to building a product business, and what he thinks Republicans need to be doing to be more competitive. Brad, you were the first digital strategist to make that leap to campaign manager for a presidential campaign. And that's still something that we don't really see a lot on down ballot races. What perspective did you bring to how you approach the campaign manager job in the re-election campaign?
There was a substantial shift that happened in 2016 from the campaigns, and from previous campaigns where I think most campaign managers before me were much more about the message. And with President Trump, he really was the guy driving the message. He was the chief strategist of his own political rising and management. And my job was much more like where Corey was kind of about events and ground game. Kellyanne, duplicated the president's message on TV, and Bill, the final, was kind of more about the stakeholders. I was the reason why I think all those middle years, I was really about building data, building contacts. How do we raise? We end up raising almost $3.4 billion while I was manager and digital director. And I think that it was really the first presidential campaign that was a long-term data operation. I think data is driving more and more in politics. We end up getting over 50 million contacts in our system. The president raised most of his money, almost 90% via small dollars. So the campaign was, and lastly, I think the other thing was I really built an internal advertising agency so we wouldn't rely on paying percentages to outside vendors. That just really had never been done before. I think that confused the outside world. We didn't have to pay a percentage for digital buys and TV buys and all these things because we had our own advertising agency built right into the campaign. So, I'd spent 25 years of my career building advertising agencies, marketing agencies, running large corporations, working on data efforts. And I think what the family recognized was I had done everything that really the campaign needs to do. Unlike other campaigns where maybe the candidate didn't have the message and needed help with that, I don't think anyone thinks for a second that President Trump had a problem coming up with his own message.
Right. And that's a really good way to put it, because it's sort of like the difference between strategy and tactics and logistics, right? You're running one of the most modern campaign operations we've seen, which I guess previously you could have a campaign manager who understood, what the 3 TV networks were saying, what the major newspapers were doing, and how to shape that. That's not the world that we live in anymore. It's online. It's being able to contact people directly, those first party audiences. And you were really focused on just building that up. And I remember just being on the outside, people would ask like, oh gosh, this burn rate's really high. What is Brad doing? I said, he's building a list, building data. He's doing exactly what every campaign should be doing in this modern era.
Yes, that's 100% accurate. So, people didn't really understand that I was spending like 2 years ahead. And he's like, why is he spending $1.4 million a month? Well, I was generating that $1.4 million was 26% cost of generating $4 million, in revenue. And so everything, but the long-term value of that $1 million spend ended up being $36 million, because when it came to push come to shove, I could literally go to tens of millions of people and say, hey, give us $5. And I spent the 26 cents to get them 2 years before. You had to see it that way. That if you're running a campaign now with just 90 days and start with a list of zero, your chances of raising large amounts of small dollars or even getting victory, unless you have super high name ID, is literally little to none. I mean, and most of the presidential campaigns that are run in the future will rely on data from the previous presidential campaign to do it. I mean, the RNC voter or email list, I think when the day I walked in 2016 to the RNC was only like 1 million some people. By the time we left, it was tens of millions. That was with, through our JFC with them and participating with them. I mean, we changed the party. We changed the way email marketing works, the way data distribution works with the president. I think that partnership with the RNC will have decades of long-lasting experience. And also, look how many companies have started by individuals who worked from the campaign from 2015 to 2020. I mean, literally the boom of most of the industry, from Win Red to Open Sesame, and all these are people who either worked for the RNC or the campaign for those 5 years.
Right. So, Brad, do you think it's accurate to say that the core competency of campaigns going forward is the ability to collect data, build audiences?
I think it's dependent on what kind of candidate it is. So people always ask me, it's like, hey, what would you do? Should we bring a digital person on? I think it's like, if you're Herschel Walker right now, I could see a need for a more digital style campaign manager, right? But if you're Ted Budd in North Carolina, I could tell you probably are better, a guy who knows how to, hit coffee shop to coffee shop and retail politics, right? I think it really depends on the candidacy you have and the type of elections. I mean, I think that we see now that there are different kind of candidates that can work in different areas. You have your, the Madison Cawthorns that come out of nowhere and just crush it digitally, and, Marjorie Taylor Greene. And then you have other candidates that, they do retail, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I would be the wrong person to hire for that. I barely like going into a restaurant on my own, let alone going with, a candidate and kiss babies and shake hands.
Right. So when someone asks me what the future of digital on campaigns looks like, I often just point out that we won't have a digital department for much longer, since data is in everything that we do. We've had a guest on the show before who said, we don't have a phone department, for example. So what advice would you give to someone who is more technologically savvy or digital first, let's say, that wants to take on more of those leadership roles within campaigns and organizations? How do they get the buy-in, get the confidence from the decision makers to have that role?
Well, I think you hit it right there at the end. I think the problem is what people know. And so there's a scary sense to some of these, some people that are still in politics, or a lot of people still in politics, are kind of pre-1997, when they got their industry started, and they have a harder time grasping onto what's happened over the last 20-some years. But, they get they need it. But I think you're right that, we don't have a phone department, we don't have, these other types of stuff. But like, there's still a need for a digital content creation. The content creative you make for digital is different than TV. Our TV commercial, everybody's in 30 and 60 seconds, maybe a 15. You will be making ads sometimes for Facebook or YouTube that are 7 seconds, 3 seconds, pre-roll, and doing some things that you wouldn't do. And it takes people with knowledge of that. So I still think content creation is a huge part of it. However, data and digital should be completely integrated in the entire ecosystem of your campaign. And this is why I built Campaign Nucleus, from recognizing, for years, 7 years of running or working for the Trump campaign. I was employee number one, February 21st, 2015. And I recognized, even towards the end, after all the money I spent, and all the teams and all the technology we built, we still were so siloed. There were things occurring that, missed opportunities because, the coalitions didn't know what was happening in our rally, and we were missing an opportunity of raising money after the rally and the product sale. There was no normalizing of data to a point, even though we had probably the largest data lake anyone in politics ever seen, and probably still do. We're still trying to fight to understand, and I've spent 2 years now in that data lake, how to normalize all that data, to analyze it. And we're just starting to do things like that, like send an email list and see who opened it and see what the kind of voters that are opening your email. Right now, there's not a system in the world other than Nucleus that can do something like that. And so, people before just didn't care. They just looked at revenue. cost, ROAS, very basic
Return on
KPIs.
ad spend. Right,
Yeah, return on ad spend and key performance indicator. But like with Nucleus, we can start looking at KPIs differently. Like, what is the goal of what we're doing here? What are the things that are occurring? Also really building, entire campaigns that remove silos and make things more efficient. And then once you do that, you can add AI and machine learning in to do some tasks that maybe computers can do better than humans.
Right. So, Brad, what's the biggest challenge there in breaking down those data silos? Is it getting different teams on a campaign to cooperate, or is it structuring that data? So, for example, for our listeners who may not know, most voter files don't have like an email on there, and so the email that you get, you're going to have to do a match to against like first name, last name, zip, to be able to get that to a voter file. So structuring the data and how much of it is the sort of cooperation, the silos within teams.
I think that one of the hardest things to get people to do is just to adapt to new things. We have people right now. We have a tremendous amount of people moving from Salesforce to Nucleus because Salesforce, as of yesterday or a few days ago, sent a letter. 4,000 employees said fire the NRA, get rid of conservatives, get rid of Trump. So right now it's teaching people a new system. Even though there's a lot of similarities, it's new. People they get used to one thing and they don't like change. I think for an overall campaign, it's tough for people to really come in midship in the Nucleus. Nucleus really isn't going to be ready for like prime time, I think, until the 24 cycle. Mm-hmm. Right now, it does some things really well and some new things that no one's ever seen before. We have a very innovative war room. We have a press system that no one's ever seen before. We do email batching. We can warm up IPs in almost a third the time anybody else can. There's just a lot of innovative things we have, and I think that's shocking to people. It's just this change, and I think this change has been occurring since 2016. It started, the roots of it in 2012. People knew it was coming. 2016, it started to come. 2020, if it wasn't for COVID, would have had substantial change. And I think in 24, you're going to see the first campaigns really running on operating systems. Businesses have. And I think the other major thing that brings, which no one really recognizes, is bringing managed services finally to politics. Almost every business industry in the world has managed services because they're all run on operational software and stuff. And so people can pop in and pop out. They don't have to be there every day. And I think that when you finally have campaigns running on software, that allows you to hire people that are experts at things on, in chunks when you need them, and not everybody getting a $7,000 or $10,000 retainer, and the congressional campaigns wasting $80,000 a month on 8 employees. Yeah. And I think that's going to be the big change. Instead, they can spend $3,000 a month with 8 managed service providers.
Right. And that's why I'm really excited about what we're working on with Nucleus, and excited to see it grow, because what you're doing is you are productizing that knowledge that you developed, those systems that you developed from the Trump campaigns, and then putting in the hands of other campaigns via a product. And that is not the similar approach that other former campaign managers or top advisors to presidential campaigns have taken, where they grow an agency. So that's why I'm really excited to see that software scale out to more campaigns.
Yeah, pretty much every previous campaign to me did one of two things: start super PACs, start things, and start raising money to continue the political messaging fight, or they started an agency or a consulting firm where they just talk about what they did. I think I'm the first campaign manager in Republican history to take all the knowledge I had and say, I'm going to build a tool that makes your life easier, because I have finally been, let's just be honest, I'm probably the only campaign manager ever be a software developer, own a marketing agency, and then become a political advisor or campaign manager to the president, right? So those unique, experiences for me allows me to compartmentalize and then really truly imagine, which is what you're seeing when you look at Nucleus, what I wish I would have had on February 21st, 2015, and then how I could build a campaign faster, scale it better, and then have more belief in our victory path. And I think, and that comes from, the ability of 3 things that Nucleus does very well, which is analyze data, hold people accountable to that data, and then make action on that data. And those are the 3 things that really drive a campaign. I mean, obviously you still need message and message testing, but there's a million people in politics that want to do that. The problem is how to act on that. And that's what Nucleus tend to be. And eventually I want to bring it so a candidate that wants to run for office for a state legislator can download an iPad app, go through a few WYSIWYG wizards, and they're operating a full campaign without having hired an employee within within a couple hours.
Yeah. That's one of the things that we hear a lot with when I'm talking to candidates or maybe investors or people who come into the political space, from a background in business or technology. They're like, I just assumed you had these tools in place. And you kind of explain to them, no, they're sort of surprised that there aren't software applications that you would have for your businesses, and that's kind of the whole thesis behind Startup Caucus of we're building vertical software as a service companies for this industry.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that one of the cool things also about Nucleus, and it kind of related to that, is we're also building a open marketplace API and allowing startups and new people to not have to reinvent the wheel. One of the major problems with getting into productizing in politics is you have to almost start from scratch. It's like code line one, right? And then what is it I'm building it for? And then get the industry. And then it's just another tool. And we start looking like a campaign that has to roll out this huge carpet of all the tools. Say, okay, when we do this technology, we do this technology, and we'll get this for this. And I think that is a mistake in some ways. And so why was the iPhone so great at the App Store, and why would it become so useful and powerful, and why iOS it's the app development, not that they normalize the ability to use the phone, which is in your hand all the time, to do very simple things, but you're in the same phone all the time. So what I want to do is bring to politics is Nucleus to be is your platform, even though it's in your browser of your computer, it is your platform. And inside of that, every tool you need is there. So if some new entrepreneur kid comes in and from your investment firm and says, hey, I really think a campaign could use this, he doesn't have to start from scratch. He doesn't have to go find customers. He goes to Nucleus, writes a tool, and then he can make revenue from that, and the campaign can benefit from that. And that power of having kind of a marketplace is something we haven't seen in political on either side in the whole world. And we will be there this year.
So, Brad, you touched on this a little bit earlier about big tech and its bias against conservatives, but our listeners might be surprised to know that there's small and medium tech, which also just sort of outright refuse to work with Republicans. To what extent should we be worried about that? And if so, what can we be doing?
Well, I actually think that the small and medium tech is actually meaner and more cancel culture than the big tech. The big tech has a PR problem. The medium-sized company just says no. I mean, like, it'd be amazing. Even my own company, like, I tried to sign up for QuickBooks credit card processing for my invoices, and they approved one of my companies that had a name that was just completely, but then the one called Conservative Campaign Technology, they banned it. And then we called them and they just said, oh, we don't have a reason, and those kind of things happen every day. I mean, I'll talk to somebody on the phone and then they Google my name and then they come, well, we can't sell any services to you. It would be just too detrimental to our board. I mean, that happens a lot. But the one thing I think has occurred from cancel culture, especially post January 6th, is it made an opportunity for a lot of savvy entrepreneurs inside of politics to build our own tools. And I really feel within this cycle, 99% of what you need to do to win a campaign, you don't need the left anymore. There might be places, like social media, where ours is a little bit behind theirs, but it's still there. You can still build a grassroots on there. But I would say the tech of emailing, texting, door knocking, almost everything you do, there is a conservative choice. Now, whether or not the campaigns have moved to it, like, I can't imagine why any company in Republican politics would still be on Salesforce after Benioff said pretty much, I don't want you. We're not going to treat you as well. We're going to overcharge you, and we hate you. And if you do anything we don't like, we'll ban you. And Republicans still sign up. It's amazing to me they do that. It's this whole culture. They won't cancel me. and then one day you're canceled,
Mm-hmm.
and then you really are in a bad position. So I'm hoping companies like people like the NRA start saying, hey, let's do business with people who like us. And by the way, the worst thing about cancel culture is look what Zuckerberg did after I want pretty much used Facebook to get Trump elected in 2016. He knew he had a PR problem, so he writes a $400 million check to help the Democrats win in 2020 so he can turn around and say, look, I made up for it. I mean, that's the problem.
Right.
That's why we don't want to do it that way. And it's a problem. But as Republicans and or conservatives, we need to recognize when companies don't like us, don't keep feeding the beast. And they're going to use that money to hurt your candidates. And I guarantee you little buttons are pushed. Do you remember the day the Twitter employee deleted Trump's account just because she could? Like, think about how many times we don't know what happened.
Right. I do think a lot of the bias, you talk with folks at these companies, you sort of raise the issue of like, well, you believe in the concept of implicit bias, right? That's the whole rationale behind some of this effort. And so, of course, if 95% of your employee giving was to the Democratic nominee, there's got to be some bias, whether that was intentional or not. And we've got some examples of where it is intentional and where it is accidental. But I think the thing that keeps me up at night is those companies that form the layers of technology all the way down that nobody knows about. They're probably privately held, but they control some pretty significant infrastructure in our industry, and that keeps me up at night.
Yeah, I mean, inherent bias is a significant problem. It's one of the earliest things I think I said back even on 60 Minutes that it was pretty obvious there was inherent bias. So when I asked Facebook to send me some staff to be a human manual because I was going to spend $100 million on their platform, the most money ever spent on Facebook in a 60-day period in history. I asked them, I said, can you make sure they're conservatives first? And they were like, really? And I was like, yes. I said, because otherwise they're going to sit here and hear what we're talking about, and they're going to be inherently biased towards us. They're not going to want to put 100% in. That's a real thing. And you don't think that programmer who's writing that algorithm, for health of, words is going to go, oh, well, let's just, these when people talk about guns, it's actually violent. You can actually talk about guns and it not being violent. And so, those things exist there, and I think we're seeing that, and we're seeing more and more of that. And January 6th just brought it all out. I mean, significantly, January 6th made the world go, okay, let's just cancel. And I think of the election integrity stuff too, which is just crazy. There's nothing wrong with questioning whether or not our systems are good. The problem shouldn't be that we can't ask the question. The problem should be, well, let's get the right answer. But that's not what they want to do. They don't even want us to ask the questions. And the problem with the First Amendment is we might still have the right to free speech, but the problem in America now is you don't have the right to ask anything that you might be wrong. And if you're wrong, then you are canceled. And so we become a culture of that. And unfortunately, if you're a Christian, we become a culture of wrath, and that's just as dangerous as any other, 6 sins.
Right. You're listening to the Business and Politics Show. I'm speaking with Brad Parscale, founder of Campaign Nucleus. One of the areas that's gotten a lot of attention in terms of investment and interest are conservative social networks like Getter and Parler and now True Social from President Trump. My view on this, Brad, is that most people aren't particularly eager to be on a politics-only social network, and as a result, you really lose the powerful network effects that make Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter more powerful. What's your take on the push for conservative social networks and their capacity to be helpful to our movement?
I think it's way overblown. I mean, I think that people like the fight. It feels like they're engaged. I think it's really good for that part of kind of influencing, but like the real fight is in the neighborhoods at the school district. I mean, I would say it would be more important to have someone at every school district board meeting talking to moms than it would be to be on social media, but look, social media has a value, but I agree that like just having a political only platform is It's tough. You're going to get only the farthest of the farthest people. But let's be honest. Most people didn't get on Facebook to talk politics in 2016. They got on Facebook because they wanted to see pictures of their grandkids who had moved to the city, and then a little bit of politics. So the problem is no one's going to choose social to share pictures of their grandkids. And so, I don't have a problem with it, but like influencing politics doesn't come from the 20% of the far right. It comes from the independents and the Overton being moved to what the center looks like, right? And that happens with the people who are not political. So, the hive mentality and the messaging occurring between them, the velocity and, of language, the sentiment, the deceleration, acceleration of types of comments that are driving the political changes in America are not occurring from the 20% that go, oh my God, can you believe the left did this? It's the 20% of people go, there's a race right now, and there might be something about my taxes. That's the guy that you're influencing. The guy that doesn't even know the race is coming up, and now he shows up because he heard something that he might save some money on property taxes. And that occurs in the other networks. That occurs in the school districts. That occurs with your neighbors. That occurs by a piece of mail you get. That occurs by an advertising you get. That occurs in other ways. And so, not saying that you can't have that political fight, because activists, that part of the fight really comes from driving donations and driving people who will go do that other work. Those people are those activists, and they're always going to communicate. I'm not worried about that. I was never worried about that. And I don't think you'll see any of these social networks ever be the size of Twitter or Facebook.
And that's one thing, with Startup Caucus, when we're talking to funders, we say like, yes, those are interesting, and it is concerning about kind of the bias of existing social networks. But the way we invest in that is not a copy and paste. It's to build our own power, build our own infrastructure, build our own logistics and data, the nuts and bolts. And in a lot of ways, that's getting back to the roots of what political parties and campaigns have always been about.
No, I think you have to get back and talk. Like you have to really think, if we don't need a social media network, if we have 80 million people on an email list we can talk to every day, right? Why keep a social media network is like, fishing in a large pond, and you're just kind of hoping what comes by, and you're putting bait down, and you're just like, oh, here it is. When you can actually just take all the water out, all the fish are in your own fish tank, and that's what an email list is. And then you don't have to catch them anymore. You just look right at them. And there is something, I think, exciting for people when they see a social, oh, look how many retweets I got. It's more of a oh, look how good I am, a little bit. And it feeds that, unfortunately, some of the narcissism that exists in politics. And I think social media does that. I think the people that are really good at it tend to have personalities where they want a lot of attention. And I think it's reassuring to them that they're right. That has some data value, and we monitor that because, those kind of responses, but you have to look at them kind of carefully. But again, I think real campaigns and real elections are won in the back rooms with data and operations and GOTV and flushing and chasing votes and understanding and fighting for policies like one-hand laws against two-hand laws. And that's where elections are really won. I could make an argument that fighting for one-hand laws in every state is more important than having it if we had no social media at all.
Right. So obviously you're not shy about giving your opinion. So from a professional or tactical perspective, what needs to get fixed in the business of politics if Republicans want to be more competitive?
I think the number one thing is we can stop this culture where if you make money, you don't care. It's amazing that people come into politics and you can't make money. How dare you? Well, you want me to spend 20 years in politics not making money? I mean, this is the problem. The left, it's fine. Go make money. Build as a tool that wins elections and make as much as you want. If you're helping me win elections, why do I care? But there is this thing, and I believe it's the consulting class that used to be that was there for 40, 50 years, that was making 15% on TV buys, and now they see that dying. And so what they do is they take these new digital companies, they take these new things that are coming, and they point. What's funny is the only guy owning airplanes in DC are TV buyers. They have mansions, and I went to one guy's house once. He had a entire cooking staff, he had butler, and he has 2 airplanes. And all he does is make TV commercials. Not against making TV commercials, but those guys point at people, people that own WinRed or other things. They point, they go, how dare you make money off this? And it's like, that is doing more for elections than your TV commercials are. So, I'm not going to call out names in here, but like the people throwing, stones, live in glass houses. They're the ones with all the money. And it's a horrible thing. And most of the actual damage we do to our own party are infighting, the power struggle and the money struggle. This is why now I stay out of that city, and I try to stay out of like the press as much as possible, because it's just destructive. They want nothing more than to hold their reins of power and keep things, like it was in 1856, and say, and if we really want to win elections, then we should be getting young entrepreneurs and saying, hey, you can have a good career here. You can make six figures. You can make the same money you make at Google. Why should we not want a guy to make the same amount of money that he works at Google, so we don't have to rely on Google? And I can't get over my head why that people think that's wrong. I think that's starting to break down, and it's going to break down more and more as the technology gets better. But it is the worst part of Republican politics, is that we shame people for being successful in politics.
A number of the entrepreneurs that we work with via Startup Caucus have these successful cash flowing service businesses, but they want to expand a product. And that can be a real struggle, right? Where I'm seeing, this one client is paying me $5,000 a month, and I'm struggling to get, maybe $1,000 monthly recurring revenue with my product. Like that is a tough thing to do. So obviously you're in that position right now where you're making the shift from agency to product with Campaign Nucleus. How do you maintain that forward motion on your product and that kind of push pull?
Well, I started my career in product. My first ever job, real job, was selling product, and very quickly purchased a company in 3D animation and became a product guy. It wasn't until after kind of September 11th, and think the economy downhill, and I moved back to Texas. I started an agency business, and then I did that for a long time, and then I went back to product. One of the nice things about doing agency for a while is you start to recognize problems. So when you start seeing problems, it's easier to build product for problems. And so then when you do it, you sell it. The one thing about selling product is like selling anything in marketing. Most people just keep trying to sell the product, but you really don't need to sell a product. What you should be selling is the disease. And so if you think about it, the way to sell medicine is not advertising the medicine, but it's teaching the world the disease exists.
Like restless leg syndrome. I didn't know it existed until I saw a TV commercial about it.
Yes. What they're doing is they're not selling the pill to you. They're selling you that the disease exists. And so if in politics is the same, I mean, that's what we did with Trump, right? In 2016, was go and sell that the country's diseased. That's what we did. And then Trump would talk about cures. So people said, oh, I'm going to vote for Trump because he's going to cure this problem that I didn't even know we had. And, I think that when people get into product, it's very hard for them to change this mentality. It's easier. A service business is easy. You call me, you need me to come over and plumb your toilet. But maybe there's a new thing for your house. Now you got to have someone need it. Right. And so, those kinds of things most people build products. They don't recognize that they don't market the product per se. You market the disease of what it's solving. So when I go out and talk about Nucleus, I talk about silo problems. I talk about not how much data you're leaving on the table. You're losing from not this. And then they're like, well, how do I fix that? Nucleus. See, if I just go talk about what Nucleus can do, people are like, well, I don't know. I need that.
Right.
So most people building products really need to talk about what's wrong, make people feel they're missing something, and then say, I have a solution. So, nothing better than watching media commercials about, I didn't even know there was this type of diabetes exist or this, that. Watch commercials for medicine. They're multi-billion-dollar companies, and they do nothing better than teach us. I would think we're the most diseased society ever now. We're the most medical advanced country in the world. It's because we now know there's some disease like with 12 words long that 2,000 people have.
Right. Yeah. So speaking of problems, what's a problem or challenge that you've noticed in this space that, aside from data silos and what you're working on, that you think would make a good startup or product?
Right now, I think the biggest lack is AI modeling. I think that there's a lot to be said. We have so much data coming back now. I think processing and understanding that data would be huge. So take example, football. we have the same problem as that football had a few years ago, which is they started sucking all the data, every yard line, everything, every stuff. And then finally, there was a cloud software that was built to analyze that. And look how much football changed last year. I think they ran 75% more fourth downs were run because AI was saying statistically you were better off to win this game by doing this. And think about that. These coaches were all right. Well, that's our consultants. I've been doing this for 30 years. I kick this every time. And then all of a sudden, the computer model shows him, well, you were 92% wrong. And he's like, oh, well, let's run it. And all of a sudden, it's successful. And he's like, oh, I was wrong. So that's where we are right now in politics. We are 5 years ago in football. We're always a little bit behind. Our consultants are football coaches. They all think they're the geniuses of the world, which they're probably the best football coaches that are out there, the best consultants. But they're probably missing 80% of what they're doing because there's no model, there's no data saying, hey, how many of these doors should I knock today versus how many calls I should make? So if you get an enormous campaign, what they do is, let's just even everything out, let's spread all the money evenly across everything so I know I didn't do anything I shouldn't have done.
Right.
Where that doesn't make any sense. That's literally the theory of football 20 years ago saying, let's just kick every fourth down, let's do this because someone told me when I was 12, that's what you should do. And so that's the mentality right now. And I think there's a lot of space for understanding all the data coming back to drive better decisions of the consultant class. They're going to fight it off like crazy because, just like football coaches, they don't want a computer to tell them they should run this. And look, are there some times where gut's better? Yeah. Sometimes taking a chance and it tells me I should run, but I just don't feel it. And then ends up being the right decision. But, statistically, there's so much to be learned from all this political data. I think we're at the edge of an ocean. We barely put our toe in it.
Yeah, that's great. And if someone out there is working on that and wants some investment, please get in touch with Startup Caucus. It's definitely a problem that we see. I want to thank Brad for joining us today. You can learn more about Campaign Nucleus at campaignnucleus.com. His team would be more than happy to give you a demo, I'm sure, and you can get all the latest from that platform there. Please remember to subscribe to the Business of Politics show wherever you listen to podcasts if this is your first time listening. We always ask people if it made you a little bit smarter or gave you something to think about it. Please share the episode with a friend. And if you've been listening for a while, please consider leaving a review or rating on Apple Podcasts. That helps more people hear the show and bring them into our innovation ecosystem. With that, I want to say thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.